Wilson and welcome to Africa News. Let's see the headlines from across the continent. Salt harvesting returns to Senegal's Lake Retba 4 years after severe flooding brings the industry to a halt. Prolonged drought deepens food insecurity in Uganda as officials link 16 deaths to food shortages. And Türkiye extends its military deployment in Somalia for another 2 years as security cooperation deepens. Thanks for joining us. 4 years after devastating floods brought Lake Retba's salt industry to a standstill, Senegal's famous pink waters are supporting livelihoods once again.
Its striking pink waters have made Lake Retba one of Senegal's best-known landmarks. But beneath the surface lies an industry that has supported generations of families. That changed in 2022, when severe flooding forced authorities to divert rainwater into the lake. The influx of fresh water disrupted its delicate ecosystem, bringing salt production to a halt and dealing a heavy blow to the local economy. 4 years on, the lake is producing salt once again, and the people who depend on it are returning to work. One of them is 45-year-old salt harvester Seydou Touré, who has spent more than 15 years working these waters.
The lake has given me everything. I owe everything to this lake. The money I made from this salt allowed me to buy land, horses and cattle. Everything comes from the lake. What happened affected us a lot. We woke up one morning and had lost everything. Hundreds of people work here every day. We were forced to bring in machines to save as much salt as we could, but there was very little we could do. The hardest work is going into the lake. Sometimes the water gets so hot that we have to stop working. The water also eats into our skin and causes many wounds. Only prevention keeps it from getting worse.
Seydou's story is shared by thousands of others. In a typical year, around 3,000 people harvest salt at Lake Retba, while another 2,000 earn a living through transport, trade, and other businesses linked to the lake. It also attracts thousands of visitors during the tourist season. When the floods changed the lake almost overnight, that work disappeared. For many families, it meant losing their main source of income.
What happened affected us a lot. We woke up one morning and had lost everything. Hundreds of people work here every day. We were forced to bring in machines to save as much salt as we could, but there was very little we could do.
Recovery did not happen overnight. Local businesses, community groups and volunteers raised money to pump excess water back towards the sea. As the lake gradually became saltier again, the microorganisms responsible for its famous pink colour returned. Earlier this month, community leaders marked the official reopening of the lake for salt harvesting. Today, bags of salt are once again leaving the lakeshore, while local hotels prepare for tourists to return. For the people who live and work around Lake Retba, the reopening marks the return of an industry that has shaped this community for generations.
The UN Refugee Agency says 144 people are reported dead or missing after attempting to reach Europe by sea from West Africa. The deaths are linked to 3 separate incidents off the coast of Mauritania between the 14th and 18th of July. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says one boat which left the Gambia drifted in the Atlantic for nearly 25 days before it was rescued. 38 people survived. The agency says the latest incidents highlight the continuing risks faced by migrants and refugees using the Atlantic route to the Canary Islands.
Overall, this is a stark reminder that despite sustained efforts by coastal authorities and partners to save lives, the Atlantic route from West Africa to the Canary Islands remains one of the world's deadliest mixed movement corridors due to long distances, unpredictable ocean conditions, unseaworthy and overcrowded boats, and limited access to timely rescue.
Sudan's worsening humanitarian crisis is pushing hundreds of thousands of displaced people towards severe hunger. Naba Muhyiddin has more from Khartoum.
The humanitarian situation in Sudan continues to deteriorate, with the United Nations warning that nearly 400,000 displaced people in North Kordofan are facing emergency levels of hunger. The UN says ongoing fighting in districts like Shekan, Bara, and West Bara is making it increasingly difficult for families to access food and basic services. Aid agencies say they are struggling to meet growing needs as funding falls far short of requirements. The UN humanitarian appeal for Sudan remains less than half funded, limiting the amount of assistance that can reach those most in need. The World Food Programme has also warned that severe funding shortages are forcing it to limit the amount of food despite the growing crisis and the ongoing humanitarian crises in the country. The UN is urging the international community to increase funding and also secure safe humanitarian passages, warning that without urgent action, the humanitarian situation in Sudan will continue to deteriorate across the country, and of course it will impact millions of people in war zones and also in relatively calm areas. Naba Muhiddin for News, Khartoum, Sudan.
A prolonged drought is pushing communities across northeastern Uganda deeper into hunger.
Uganda is facing one of its worst dry spells in recent years, with prolonged drought destroying crops, reducing water supplies, and worsening food insecurity. The crisis is most severe in the northeastern region of Karamoja, where months of little rainfall have left fields barren and pushed vulnerable communities into a growing humanitarian emergency. Government officials say the food shortages have already turned deadly. Authorities have launched an emergency relief operation, with food supplies being sent to the worst affected districts.
Sadly, it has been reported that 16 people have died from causes associated with food shortages in the region. The Prime Minister has also arranged for another consignment of relief food for immediate distribution to the most affected districts requiring urgent assistance, including Kabong, Kotido, Amdat, Napak, and Moroto.
Uganda's Ministry of Water and Environment has warned that dry conditions are likely to continue through July and into August, placing further pressure on crops, livestock, and already limited water sources. Farmers say the impact is already being felt across rural communities, with grazing areas drying up, milk production falling, and banana plantations badly damaged.
We rely on matoke and milk to get by, but the sun has been way too harsh lately. This dry spell has really cut down the milk our cows give because the grazing areas have dried up and the heat has wreaked our banana plantations too. We even took out bank loans to invest in the farms, but now we can't even afford to pay them back.
Officials warn reduced agricultural output in Karamoja could tighten food supplies across Uganda and push prices higher. Scientists say the drought is another sign of increasingly unpredictable weather patterns across East Africa, where communities dependent on rain-fed agriculture are becoming more vulnerable to climate extremes. Forecasters also warn that a developing El Niño later this year could bring heavier rainfall to parts of the region, raising the risk of flooding in areas now struggling with drought.
In Nairobi, one man's life on the streets has become the foundation for an unusual rescue mission. Known locally as the Birdman, Kenyan Rogers Magutha has turned his home into a shelter for injured wild birds and hopes to one day open a rehabilitation centre for them.
Kenyan Rogers Magutha is known across Nairobi as the city's Birdman. A former homeless man, he now shares his home with rescued wild birds, feeding and caring for them before taking them through the streets perched on his head and shoulders. The site often draws curious crowds, with residents stopping to take photos of Magutha and his feathered companions. Magutha says his mission began while he was living on the streets, when he saw a connection between abandoned birds and homeless people. Since then, Magutha says the birds have given him a new sense of purpose.
I've released more than 20 birds now from marabou stork, cattle egret, Adada ibis, African sacred ibis, the African pied crow, the black-eyed. Yeah, for me, I know, I monitor them because most of the birds I rescue myself and other people call me to rescue.
For Magutha, the birds also carry a wider message. He says seeing crows, eagles, kites, and pigeons living together shows that different species and people can coexist peacefully.
Most of the people, they don't believe that a crow and the eagle or a kite with a pigeon can live together. At least I've shown people that we can still, not only the birds, but even us people, we can still live together in harmony, in peace, whereby we cannot fight. Yeah, as long as we have a safe space to stay, we can live together, and that is the message.
Health experts warn that close contact with wild birds can carry risks, including possible zoonotic diseases such as avian influenza. But there is no evidence that Magutha or his birds have been diagnosed with any such illness.
Turkey's military in Somalia is set to stay deployed for another 2 years. It's after Parliament approved an extension. The move comes as Somalia continues its fight against the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab group, while Turkey expands its military and economic presence in the country. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
The Turkish parliament has approved a presidential motion extending the deployment of Turkish military forces in Somalia for another 2 years, as Ankara continues to deepen its security partnership with Mogadishu. The mandate allows Turkish forces to continue supporting efforts against terrorism, piracy, smuggling, and other security threats. The move comes as Somalia confronts the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militant group, which has carried out repeated attacks despite sustained counter-terrorism operations by Somalian and international forces. Türkiye has emerged as one of the country's closest international partners since 2011, when then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Mogadishu during a famine. The relationship has expanded considerably, encompassing humanitarian assistance, building infrastructure, trade, diplomacy, and defense cooperation. Also, Türkiye runs its largest overseas military training facility in Mogadishu, where Turkish personnel have trained thousands of Somali soldiers as part of efforts to strengthen the country's armed forces. More recently, in 2024, the two countries signed a defense and economic cooperation agreement under which Türkiye agreed to help Somalia enhance its maritime security capabilities and protect its territorial waters. Ankara has also increased its involvement in the country's nascent energy sector, including offshore oil and gas exploration. The extension of Türkiye's military commitment in Somalia reflects its broader strategy of bolstering its political, economic, and security presence in the Horn of Africa region. For Somalia, Turkish military support comes as the government seeks to assume greater responsibility for national security while maintaining its operations against Al-Shabaab. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
That's all we've got time for today on African News. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News. Bye for now.